Welcome back to Heightscast, the podcast of the Heights School. This is Nate Gaudiano with you from the campus of the Heights in Potomac, Maryland. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Joseph Lanzilotti, who joined the Heights faculty back in 2002. He taught for 1 year in the Valley as a fifth grade homeroom teacher, and now he teaches in the upper school, where he teaches math and Latin. I believe, is that right, Dr. Lanzilotti?
That's correct. Also, it's 2022.
Back in 2022 is when he joined. Okay, excuse me. And Joseph has a long list of credentials. I didn't realize how long until I read your bio before preparing for this podcast. He's got a doctorate in theology from the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family at the Catholic University of America. That's a mouthful.
It is.
A Master of Arts degree in theology from Ave Maria, and he's got a Bachelor of Science degree in biology, and a second major in philosophy from DeSales University. He also has a certification in healthcare ethics from the National Catholic Bioethics Center, and he's taught biochemistry and a number of other courses in different institutions. But I must say my favorite credential, and one that I learned just a couple of days ago when we were preparing for this conversation, is that you're a beekeeper. So perhaps we'll have to have Dr. Lanzilotti back for that in a future podcast.
That would be excellent.
Today, however, I am really excited to share some of the research that Dr. Lanzilotti has been doing this past year. I see this conversation, Joseph, sort of as a public recorded version of the kind of conversations that we've been having throughout the year. And just to give some context for the listeners here, as many of you know, through the forum, we've, in the last few years, have started offering different professional development and services and conferences and events and these sorts of things. And we really are focusing a lot of this on what is our bread and butter, what we have been doing, what we do, which is teach boys, educate boys in the liberal arts tradition. And so, one of the things that we're very serious about is, continual improvement. So always trying to improve ourselves and also help others as they seek to grow. I remember Headmaster Alvaro de Vicente saying that he always assumes that there's something not quite right with the curriculum or with how the school is going, and that's a good approach. There's always something to work on. And one of just the great things or opportunities that we've had through the forum, through this work, is just another chance to expand our research, to deepen our understanding of what we do and why we do it and how we can do it better. So all of this is a long-winded way of saying that Dr. Lanzilotti has been spending the last year just sort of getting a sense of the landscape of the literature out there on boys' education, boys' pedagogy, both from a scientific perspective and also a philosophical and even theological perspective as well. So everything from neuroscience to theology. And so I hope this conversation is just going to be kind of looking back, reflecting back on what you've found so far. I know there's still more work to be done. So maybe we can I'll stop there with the introduction. And if you could, just to kick us off, give us maybe, Dr. Lanzilotti, a brief history, bird's eye view of what you found, sort of the history of this research and literature on boys' education.
Right. Well, thank you, Nate. When we began this project, it was very open-ended in terms of let's see what's out there. Let's see what is being said, what has been said about the nature of boys' education specifically, bringing up boys, how do we raise boys. And so I took the long-range approach of saying, hey, let's look at the whole 20th century basically and see what's out there for at least, end of the 19th into the 20th. And it's fascinating because back at the end of it's basically the 1800s, you see a lot of interest actually in this topic. Although there's definitely more to do to make sure I'm not missing anything, it seems as though in the mid-20th century, there's this gap. There isn't a lot of interest, especially into the 60s, 70s. All of a sudden, the late 80s, there's a little bit of interest in this. In the 90s, it starts to pick up. in the early 2000s, it really picks up. And then and by the middle of the 2000 teens is when you get books about basically like the war against boys is one of them. Because in the 90s you have some research and some researchers who are saying there's a problem with boys and violence, and what do we do with this? How do we deal with this problem? And in the 2000s you begin to see more and more this consistent falling behind of boys, that they're dropping out of school more often than women, that they are applying to and being accepted by colleges at a much lower rate than their female peers, and all kinds of things. They're being diagnosed, obviously, with more disorders, ADHD beginning with ADHD, right, of course, and ADD. And so there are many authors who are begin to enter the conversation to both acknowledge there's a problem, that it seems it's almost impossible to deny that there's a problem regarding boys and in our current society, in our current schools, the state that they're in. And but then there's also at the same time a growing body of research showing that the differences between men and women are far more than just the obvious, that what we may know about the brain and neuroscience, just by our experience, is being confirmed by all these studies. And so someone like Dr. Lewin Brizendine writes The Male Brain, which I have here, and which is one of them that we reviewed recently. So there are just a number of contributors, right, and it's been a growing field, and it's been really fascinating to be now in 2025, right, where we get to I think benefit from all that's been done, especially in the past 2 decades.
Yes, it seems just in many of our conversations, it seems like really the last 15, 20 years is as you mentioned, kind of an uptick in a kind of renewed interest in the topic of how to best educate boys as boys.
Yes.
And then really in the last maybe 5 years or so, that interest has kind of broadened, where you have people on, across the whole ideological spectrum. There's not just like this is what the conservative people do or something. It's really actually a lot of people. One person that comes to mind is Richard Reeves,
right,
who's someone who used to be at Brookings, and now has started this other nonprofit that is dealing with this, has his own angle. Everyone kind of is coming at it from slightly different angles, but it's definitely, I think we're at an important almost
he has
inflection.
that great piece on relational masculinity,
right,
that we've read and really appreciated.
No, and so it's cool to see people who are recognizing the problem, but then trying to answer it in slightly different ways, but also where there's a lot of agreement and overlap.
Yes, and they're doing it in a way which is not at all pitting the sexes against one another.
Right. That's yes, yeah.
They're not saying, oh, the girls are getting too much. No, it's actually that we need, and this is the Gurian Institute does a really good job of this, and because they attend to the difference, and therefore the Gurian Institute helps to educate schools, administrators, teachers, parents, in terms of how do we best help girls to thrive, and how do we best help boys to thrive, because they are different, because they develop differently, cognitively, physically, psychologically, mentally, and emotionally. So
right.
by basically by listening to what the researchers are telling us, we can tailor our approaches, even within a mixed coeducational classroom.
Right.
One of the things that Gurian,
that is interesting.
Like the Gurian Institute is, he very much favors single-sex education, but he recognizes that that's just not a reality on the ground
practically
for most people.
Right. Well, great. Yeah, so we kind of are at a little bit of an inflection point here. Maybe this is kind of a real chance to improve the way we educate boys. So let's maybe dive into a little bit of this research. I was thinking maybe 2 broad categories that we could look at that are related and that sort of give us a nice can kind of structure the conversation. So first, let's maybe talk a little bit about just developing a vision of masculinity. So what is a man? Just a super easy question. Well, what is a man, right? Not controversial at all. And then the second one would be, how do we then best educate boys? I know we talk about around here a lot, educating boys according to their nature. So what does that mean?
Yes.
So those would be our two categories. Let's start with the first, and just a softball question: What is a man?
Right. So
what have you read?
The reason that you ask this question, I know, is because when we are raising boys, whether it's our sons or the boys in our classroom or a mentee, an important part of that is always going to be fatherly, and and to be a father is always to provide some kind of guidance towards an end, towards a vision that we have. So to ask the question, what is a man, or how a man ought to be, what are the characteristics of a mature, fully alive man?
Right, a man fully alive.
Yeah, a man truly fully alive. And we've spoken about this, obviously. And, what we've come to is how important it is to first be a son, and then I recognize that you come from ultimately the Father, God the Father. That divine filiation is extremely important. I mean, St. Joseph Scriba talks about this, of course, and others, but that filial, Pope John Paul II, just to go a little bit into theological anthropology, the way that theology and this conversation come together is this area of theological anthropology. And Pope John Paul II, in his writings on basically what's been called theology of the body, catechesis on human love, speaks about original experiences, and one of them being divine original solitude, in which we recognize our coming from God, and then that we relate to God in prior to any of our other relations. Now I say this because something we've talked about a lot is that every man who exercises either as a teacher or a dad, father, participates in this fatherhood. But we're not just sons; we're also beloved sons, and that's hugely important as well. We speak a lot at the Heights about how important it is that we love these boys. We listen to them because we love them, and we want what's best for them, and we're willing to guide them, or at least give them some, in freedom, of course, to help them to exercise their freedom, to become who they're made to be. And what is that? Well, we talked a lot about generosity, right? So we learn both from our own fathers and those male role models who embody what masculinity is really about, as a generosity of spirit, where I think less of myself and more of those I have responsibility for. I love that idea of a generous masculinity, that there's rooted in the Father, who is eternally the generator, the one eternally begetting the Son. The kind of the incommunicable dimension of his personhood is that he begets the Son. So he's generous. So a man is made in that image. And this is the dignity of every human being, male and female, made in the image and likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, from the book of Genesis, that first story. That image, we know, is not just the rational nature that we have, but it's also this capacity for communion, for receptivity and gift, and fatherhood is an initiating kind of giving. Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah. So that's kind of on, going to the heights of theology. The top. What about now bringing it maybe down to the biology and sociology? What are some what are some interesting findings with respect to what distinguishes kind of manhood or masculinity?
There's so many.
Just a few. You can't give everything, but a little. Give us a little bit of the wealth, a little something.
So, although I could go in so many different directions with this question, the most obvious one, maybe for those who might be listening, is if you watch any boy or if you're in any classroom, you see boys moving much more than girls. Boys fidget. They have, and what the researchers have found is that this relates to the male brain, which is begins to be conditioned, at least from the research that I've read, from about 8 weeks after conception. Testosterone floods the male body and begins to prepare the brain as a male brain, inhibiting certain female feminine characteristics and accentuating those that are masculine. And this continues all the way through pregnancy and then for the first year of life. What's fascinating, there's so many fascinating things, but in terms of learning, boys learn best when they're in movement, and they also associate movement with what they're learning to a greater extent than girls do. So there's some research that shows that when a boy learns the word worm, for example, and their body may like wriggle like that worm. Or this is just one example. There's so many.
Yeah.
And I've done, of course, a couple of the papers that we've written on what parents need to know and teachers need to know about the male brain, which shows that these changes, they're stages of a boy's development in which we need to attend to the nature of a boy and what they need from what we call the juvenile pause, which is after that first year of life and up until what we would call, most people think of the beginning of puberty, and then adolescence and into young adulthood. And a lot of what we've talked about or seen is that there are these stages in the development of a boy, and that we just need to be attentive to their nature. So we could go into a lot of details.
Yeah, we'll get into some of those. Yeah, one of the things that I been reflecting a lot on is something that one of the founders of the Heights used to say, which is that, and this could be misinterpreted, but I understand people are going to take this in the right way, that you're a male because of your biology or because of the way you're born, but then you're a man because of your character. Mm-hmm. So there's almost like part of one of the really interesting things that are part of what I find very fascinating about especially the biological research is that it does cue you into certain tendencies or certain proclivities, certain natural inborn strengths that males by and large tend to have. And then with the help of philosophy and then ultimately theology, you're able to, answer the question, how ought these tendencies or natural proclivities, how ought they be shaped so that they come to some sort of perfection or some sort of, to ultimately virtue, to use that language. Like you mentioned movement, or you also mentioned earlier Richard Reeves' article about what he calls relational masculinity, which is just that idea that men, and this isn't just true of men, but
we are relational.
Men are relational, and though have maybe
only come to themselves through
there can
relation.
One other interesting I think an important thing too from like a cultural sociological perspective is that it's easy to have these two extremes, where on the one hand you have some people who might say, there's not really any difference between men and women, and it's all just culturally or socialized. It's just all it's all nurture, so to speak. And on the other hand, you have people who maybe overemphasize the differences or say we need to just kind of take what those inborn tendencies are, whether it's like towards physicality or towards movement, and just let them do whatever they're going to do. And there's not a shaping to it. And then you really have this middle ground, which I think is the more correct one, which is to say that there are a lot of overlap because, it's one human nature, but two embodiments. And we need to take what's unique or uniquely powerful in a male, and then those need to be shaped in a certain way towards a certain image of what it means to be a man.
Definitely.
And I think it's really helpful. One of the things that Alvaro mentions a lot, and it's not just him, is this idea of a man is a protector and a provider, but fundamentally protector. And being a protector is a way to shape a lot of those tendencies towards the good, towards service.
Yes.
And kind of going back to you mentioned theologically speaking, even if we look at Christ as the man, ecce homo, behold the man, as an image of an icon of the perfect icon of manhood.
Yeah, the one who fully reveals man to himself.
What does he do? What does he do ultimately? But save us, protect us by laying down his life. And in doing that, he's an image of the Father, as you mentioned earlier. So yeah, it's amazing how just a sort of this like layers upon layers, and you can almost look at the same
and
issues.
I find it really encouraging that many of the authors we're reading are obviously secular from their point of view. There's some ideology that comes through that makes that obvious. I mean, and yet there is I think that they. I'm thinking of Brizendine as one who sees the natural progression of a man's maturity towards becoming the kind of protector and provider that we know we're called to be as men.
Right.
That we are.
Yeah. What are some of those?
So one of them is
to get it more
she
granular.
focuses on the hormones.
Right.
And
yeah.
Many people just think of testosterone and estrogen,
Yeah,
which are typically the male. The testosterone
the
and
big
estrogen
two.
is typically the female, although they're present in both male and female, just in different degrees, and they also do different things in the body of each. But vasopressin is one that we don't think about a lot, but that actually helps a man to bond with one woman. It's what she calls it, the monogamy hormone.
Okay,
but it's also protecting and providing
a
hormone that is associated with this kind of attachment and all the kind of protection of one's own. So the two becoming one flesh in marriage for a man is when St. Paul says, husbands, love your wives,
right?
Take care of her as if she were your own body. It's confirmed that this is actually how we're biologically
the neurobiology.
The neurobiology
is pointing
actually,
you in that
it
direction.
also helps us. This is the thing too. The commandments of God are not burdensome.
Right. They work with.
They work with
against,
our nature, and
right.
actually they take it up and they elevate it to what it's meant to be. Be like St. Francis de Sales would say, be who you are and be that well. And he wouldn't say like choose who and what you are. We are something.
Yeah.
This is the thing, working with nature. We receive our nature. We receive our masculinity or our femininity as part of the gift of being human. Two uniquely different but equal in dignity ways of being a human person.
Right. Yeah. So when you're working with nature, that's the square peg in a square hole. Working against nature is the round peg in a square. It's never going to work. You're going to be frustrated.
Right. And so they also have these authors that I'm working with have partly thanks. We believe in the natural law, and the natural law is implanted in our hearts by God, and it's one of the ways in which we know how to pursue what's good. And all these researchers see that there are problems with certain ways, certain outcomes of education in which men flounder, and other ways in which they thrive. And it's clear that the idea they have of what is even the secular minded, what is a thriving man? It's someone who is able to make sacrifices for those he loves. Like Jesus says, no greater love has a man than to lay down his life for his friends. And then he calls us his friends, and he's done that for us. Not to go too far
and
far
the
afield.
vasopressin makes you feel like you want to do it.
Well, that's
something like that.
That's the thing about the. So my dissertation was on the heart as the integrating center of the person. It was on Joseph Ratzinger, the heart and the thought of Joseph Ratzinger. But a Christian anthropology is, I would say, if I could sum it up in one word, it's an anthropology of unity, and that is that we are made body and soul, but one creature. one creature. When God looks at us and we relate to God, we relate to him not just by our souls, but by the embodied spirit that we are. And so this is another reason that we need to take biology seriously when we educate, and it's a gift, all of these things. Now, to go back to something we talked about, like what men are for and all this, one of the authors we've looked at too is Anthony Esolen, who is a Christian Catholic thinker,
right.
And he's written a couple of books, one on defending boyhood, and another one on it's called No Apologies, Why Civilization Depends on the Strength of Men. And in those, he celebrates certain things that I think we ought to celebrate as educators. For example, when we see boys piling on one another, or wanting to play tackle football, or wanting to do something that's a little bit risky and maybe dangerous, those boys are preparing themselves for challenges to come. And they're pushing themselves to beyond their limits. Now, if you let a boy do that, typically they'll get a little scraped up. They'll get hurt sometimes. But if we don't do that, we actually do graver harm to them in their development. And this comes up in books like The Anxious Generation,
right?
Which we talked about the other day. How it actually tends towards a stuntedness in development.
Yeah.
Whereas by allowing, and one of the other things we talked about is the ideal classroom, and one of the things that the Gurian Institute talks about, and Dr. Michael Gurian talks about, is how important it is to incorporate an outdoor element of the classroom. And this classroom needs to be an actual natural space, if at all possible, a space that's not completely contrived. We've talked about how in the valley we do not set up like playstations where we tell, okay, this is what you have to do in this area. No, we have mulch, and we have grass, and we have trees, and the boys make trails through the little woods there, and they make forts. If you go in there, the forts are always changing, and the boys are in their own worlds. And,
it's a beautiful thing when you almost see in the boys and the things that they want to do. It is, as you mentioned, it is really preparing them to be a protector, a provider. Whether it's like, there's right now at the Heights where we have the summer camps going on. There's the Heights Nights camp.
Yes.
So it's hilarious watching them.
I've seen them.
Make their shields, and they had to learn how to serve and defend. In order to go from page to squire to knight, they have to be setting the table and opening the door and taking their hat off inside. And when you communicate to them, hey, a knight sets the table because he's a man of service, or a knight opens the door, or a knight takes his hat off inside out of respect, then they want to do it. It's not like, hey, this is the rule, you have to do this. It's no, this is, you kind of show them an image that's attractive of the kind of man that just, it hits them naturally.
Again, this, I think back to what you're saying, in one of the books, a couple of the books that we've read, it confirms, again, what we see is that boys are highly attuned to watch both what other boys are doing, those who are close to in age to them, and also the men in their lives, such as uncles, grandparents, their own father, of course, their father's friends. And they are so attentive to what they do, and they will imitate that. And so as what are we trying to do? We mentor the younger, but we also strive to have friends and who will help us, because we're, like you said, it's not as though we're saying we are the perfect men who know how to educate the boys. As teachers here at the Heights, of course, we always know we are in need of more perfection. We are not perfect yet. We're not made perfect yet. But going back to how these boys are attentive to men, I mean, Gurian talks about how important it is even if you have more female faculty, to incorporate more men into that work of education, especially in terms of mentorship. And how important it is for boys to have male mentors as they grow up.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's fascinating that just to, I mean, we kind of, a lot of these things, I think a lot of the findings we would maybe intuitively
We would, in many
recognize.
ways, I think
But
they've been embodied here for a long time.
And so it's just interesting to see, or to have maybe some confirmation even, that they're not, it isn't just like a unique thing that we're seeing, but it's actually has a broader application.
And it can be applied.
And it can be applied in a variety of settings. It's not just like, okay, this works here, but it won't work anywhere else. It actually can work in many, many places, if not everywhere. Yeah, that's interesting. You know, I always think back to, like, one of the only things that I really remember from 5th grade here at the Heights as a student was not like any of the lessons. I'm sure I retained some of that, but the main thing was just the way that my 5th grade teacher knelt down to pray. And that just always, it's just like I had this, even when I kneel to this day, like for some reason, I just have like, he had very good posture. He was a former NFL football player, so he was a very strong man. And as a kid, I was like, this is just the coolest guy ever. And he's teaching me. And like, I was just like noticed the way, I don't know what it was, you know, just sort of, and that was what stuck on my mind. And so I think about that. That's sort of, he didn't even say anything about that. I'm sure he has no idea that was, you know, I'm sure he was thinking all the lesson plannings that he was putting together were really what was going to, but it was just, you mentioned something that one of our colleagues, Mr. Babinger, had taught you, right? Of like, you teach a time, you teach a subject, you teach the boys, but then you also teach yourself.
Also, always teaching yourself.
Yeah, that you're providing an example.
You're always doing it,
which is
no matter what you do,
right,
in the classroom,
for better or for worse.
Yes. And as a father,
that's
absolutely
something to. It's a reminder and I guess a call to always improve. But
and I think that, and again, we intuitively know this, that boys look up to men and older boys to learn what it means to be an older boy or to be a mature man, a man fully alive. And one of the findings is just how the boys tend to ignore girls at a certain point. They naturally form
until another point, then they cannot, you know, then they get distracted.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. They naturally form groups with other boys, and then girls likewise will naturally do that. And so even this idea of educating boys and girls separately is according to nature, not artificial. Anthony Asselin writes a little bit about this, about how according to, and boys and girls will naturally do this. They will not. So Gurian talks about the importance of allowing boys to work in groups with other boys, even in coeducational schools, and girls to work with girls. Having
some of those single sex environments. I know there are many schools out there that I know of that.
But how the boys will, and of course there are exceptions for this, but by and large the boys will ignore the girls at a certain age. They'll begin to ignore the girls.
What are those ages?
We're talking about what's called the juvenile pause. So we're talking about
until puberty, more or less.
Yeah, pretty much until puberty.
Okay.
When they begin to actually be kind of fascinated, very fascinated.
Right. Then there's a different justification from a biological perspective of single sex.
And things like this is a book which the two sexes growing up apart, coming together, which was referenced by others who I read. I haven't read it yet, but I was just glancing through it and recently got the copy.
Yeah.
It speaks about, recognizes that whether we do it intentionally or not, this is the kind of movement,
tendency
of human nature,
right?
To associate, and then to come together, of course,
to integrate.
For a purpose. And this is something we can talk about, and we ought to be talking about, because I brought up Anthony Asselin. There is obviously a need to bring the sexes together for the purpose of forming families, right? You need to, but a man needs to become the kind of man who is, as we've said here before, what does the Heights exist for? What our former headmaster, I think it was
to graduate the kind
of man you would want your daughter to marry.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
you want your daughter to marry a man who, when the going gets tough, is going to raise it to the next level, right? And why do we do sports here at the Heights? One of the reasons, and Pope John Paul II wrote a lot about and encouraged us to look at the benefit and the virtue of sport. What is sport? But it helps us to kind of go beyond what we think we can do, go beyond the limits that we think we can, right? And you do this within the context
sport,
of a team.
And also like the mountaineering, the camping trips, and
yeah, right. We're not only talking about soccer.
Right. Sport generally,
yes,
generally speaking.
But even those things, and the camping that we do overnight camping, we do hikes, and there are points at which everyone thinks, no, I can't do that. We can't.
Yeah, right.
We can't cross that.
Yeah.
But we find that we can do a lot more than we think we can. And the kinds of men we want to graduate are those men who have had those experiences, so that when they come up against difficult situations, first of all, they can know that they're not doing it alone.
Mm-hmm. They have friends.
We have friends, and we have the Holy Spirit. We have our intimate life of prayer. Here at the Heights, we offer the Mass every day for students, and students attend freely
and frequently.
Freely and frequently.
Right.
And faculty as well. You go into the chapel and you find boys just making visits, praying. Faculty the same way. And why do I bring this up? Because a tendency, which we've seen and Richard Reeves brings up, is the Lone Ranger. I'm going to do it alone. I'm going to figure it all out by myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that tends towards isolation and depression, and it tends towards us being picked off in a way, and not becoming what we're made to be.
It's like that sort of, we are dependent, rational creatures, as I think it was, I forget who made. I think it was maybe some philosopher. I forget what his name is. Maybe McInerney. But yeah, we're not called to be these isolated beings, or persons for communion. Yeah.
And Anthony Esselin, in his book on No Apologies, Why Civilization Depends on the Strength of Men, writes a lot about how amazing it is when men come together for a common purpose. Mm-hmm. And he speaks about the power of the team. And what I think of with this is how these boys who are forming friendships with other boys who have like Aristotle's idea of the virtuous man in mind, that what is my friendship? There are different kinds of friendship, right? Aristotle talks about, and there are friendships of pleasure and utility, but there's friendship of virtue, and friendship of virtue is is the kind of friend who you and he and your whoever is in this group of friends they're always striving towards improving who they are, and and this is the kind of team mentality of friendship, I think, that we try to instill and we try to live here among the faculty. Raising each other up, bringing each other up, lending the hand, coming to each other to the help when we need to, but also saying, "Hey, come on, hey, you can do it. Get back up," and just kind of segue into something else we found is that, again, going back to the Gurian Institute, he talks about this idea of what he calls aggression nurturance, which aggression in that term he doesn't mean
in a negative sense.
What he means is things that are perceived as aggression, but are really a boy tending to another boy through toughness, through kind of wrestling and tussling around, and
the punch
involving
on the shoulder,
him, right? Punch on the shoulder, or in the valley, saying, "Hey, won't you play this Fort Wars with me?" And of course, they're all setting up vying forts.
Yeah,
but it actually helps them to become stronger friends because they've all entered in this together.
Yeah, and maybe also in the high school that what is very obvious because it's physical and bodily in the lower school that sense, but maybe also there's a way that translates to like upper school, like seminar discussions even, where there's maybe a sense of like, hey, we're going to like test out these ideas. We're going to be willing to challenge each other on our ideas.
Yes.
And there's not like
it's not about
there's not a fear maybe, or there's of confrontation being going to lead to a breakdown of a relationship.
Definitely.
But actually that, in a sense,
that can actually strengthen.
The confrontation is what is going to strengthen it. Or because you're like, hey man, like, yeah, you got wow. Okay. Like we're in this. Because one of the fascinating things that we also found, I think a lot of is in terms of differences and tendencies of men and women, is not so much that the matter, whether it's of a subject or like what you're doing necessarily, has to be so different between men and women, but where there's a big difference is the manner or the way it's done, or the approach. So one example that comes to mind is directions. So there's a lot of studies out there that show that find that if a man is giving directions, they will more frequently use cardinal directions, north, south, left, right, and less landmarks. I mean, of course, again, this is in general. And women will more frequently use landmarks. So there's something about, same thing, different way. And it's part of that complementarity. Maybe you need both. Okay, you gotta go north, but which way is north? Oh, north is towards the stadium there, right?
Yes.
And so I think that's another fascinating thing that because I think another danger or worry that some people might have is about this kind of research or this kind of approach of like, are you saying like men can only do certain things or women can only do certain things? I mean, there is going to be some things where that might be mostly true. Right. Like there are way more, whatever, like bricklayers or soldiers or things.
There are. And I think Anthony Esolen really writes well about this, that it's because the male body is better disposed to certain kinds of work. Right.
But then there is other areas where there's a genuine overlap in matter and in a beautiful complementarity in manner. And you can think of like in the workplace, I know, and you can speak more to this too, John Paul II speaking about bringing the feminine genius to places that maybe traditionally there were fewer women. So there's a certain way of thinking even, or way of like a way of approaching certain tasks which are improved.
Yes, and in that letter, which we've read on the collaboration of men and women in the church and in the world, which I highly recommend anyone listening. Look it up. It's from the prefect of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith at the time was Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, so he's the main architect. It clearly was influenced largely by Pope John Paul II's theological anthropology, but which is very, very close to Ratzinger's, and
it's a great letter.
It's an excellent letter, rooted in the Second Vatican Council's teaching from Gaudium et Spes 22 and 24. But this letter on the collaboration of men and women and speaks about these as being human values. So what I mean is that the woman embodies a way of being human, which the man has a tendency, not, it doesn't have to, but has a tendency to forget or to be inattentive to. Yeah. And it's rooted in her own biology. That is, she has the capacity to receive life within her body. Within her body, she has a place for another. Radically, she is a place for another. And you think of Our Lady, the Blessed Virgin Mary, who received the word from the angel Gabriel and conceived in her womb and gave place to the infinite, the one who could fill all things. But every woman in her exercises a kind of maternity in the world, in that she gives place for the person, and she has an attentiveness to the person, which is an important part of any human endeavor. So John Paul II in his letter to women, and on the dignity of women, he has two letters that you can look at, and then in relation to this document that I just mentioned, they talk about the need for women to enter into professions that even are typically filled with men, so that they can be fully humanized. That there's this need for complementarity, But he also says how it's important for society to allow this to happen without taking her from the heart of the home, and that societies need to be
More
courageous in that, and more creative in allowing women, especially during the tender years of childhood, the youngest years of a child's life. And we're not just talking about the first two, but we're talking about until they're basically, if
That's
they're not homeschooled, until they're in, here it would be third grade. But and you can see that this does happen, and this can happen. But when I bring this up because it's an area that John Paul II spoke about, and which is sometimes forgotten about.
Yeah, well, and I think one of the things that Ratzinger says in that letter, to kind of pull it back to what we were saying before, is just this idea that, as you mentioned, men and women each have certain values or certain characteristics, certain virtues maybe, that they are, and this is his language, the privileged sign and reminder of, and that the kind of coming to your full flourishing as a man or as a woman is going to involve a particular integration of both of those. So, and that's going to happen in many different ways. Of course, it's going to have different, there's different unique ways in which it happens, but that you'd almost do harm when you overemphasize either the differences or the unity, that there's difference that is integrated into this harmony, both among the sexes and within each of the sexes. Is kind of what he talks about there, which I think is awesome. Yeah,
and I think that something that comes to mind is when we think about masculinity. What do we have in mind? And when we think about femininity, what do we have in mind? There's clearly from our own experiences, a wide range of what it could mean for a man to be masculine and for a woman to be feminine. And the masculine genius and versus the feminine genius, these things, like you said, they're not two different species of humanity, but they are. Let's just say, the way that a man tends to be able to hyper-focus on fixing a problem is tremendous, but it makes it harder for him to do something like be managing all of these things happening at the same time within a home, where you have to be. The homemaker tends to be a woman. Now, it could be a man, right? But the woman has a certain capacity within, and this partly has to do with the difference between the separation of
the hemispheres.
The hemispheres. The conversation between left and right. But a man's capacity to attend to a task and see it to completion is extraordinary, but it sometimes requires that he tune out other things and forget about other things. Whereas a woman's brain, is, from the research I've read, it doesn't happen that way.
Right, they're just tended more attuned to the environment.
To always be aware of the environment. And
So
even so much so that,
touch,
we talked about this,
smell.
even so much that boys will quickly tune out white noise, and a woman's brain does not.
Right. And the white noise might be a teacher's voice.
Exactly. The white noise might be a teacher's voice, which is why when boys start to look like that, one of the things we need to do is
get them moving, get them.
Yeah, there's some different, kind of going back to the very practical. There are some great tips which we'll be sharing in the articles that we release, but just about like, okay, a boy can easily begin to tune you out in a way. So you need to re-engage them, and a lot of times it's gonna be through a way that might seem too much to a girl. Like, raise your voice a little bit. Wait, why is he screaming? That's another thing we found. That when the way that boys and girls hear voices of male teachers is
different.
Is very different. For a man, for a teacher to be just talking in a normal voice may sound like screaming or yelling to a girl, to a girl's ears. But to a
Yeah.
boy's ears, you
He
might
not even
if you
be able to
don't
hardly hear
he
you.
barely hears you,
Right.
Which is why he may tune out a female teacher who talks too low.
Yeah.
Too
Or
low
if he's
of a
put in
voice.
the back of if it's
Or
a
he's put in the
co-ed
back of the
classroom, for example. If he's
So
put in the back of the classroom.
for a teacher, for a female teacher who has boys and girls, she may have to speak up a little more.
Or strategically place
the boys a little bit closer so that they can hear.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, we are almost out of time. Before we do get there, I would be remiss if I didn't ask what maybe are your top 2 or 3 like practical tips that or things that you've drawn from the research that you would like to share with, what comes to mind?
Okay, so there's so many. So one is be not afraid. Be not afraid of boys. Be not afraid of boys. And I say this one because one of the authors that we've read, which I haven't spoken about, Michael Reichert, he writes about how to raise boys. And we found that in reading that, there were some things that I thought were disappointing about it. But I thought at the same time, the reason he was writing the book was because so many parents, when they find out they're going to have a boy, whether it's before the baby's born or after, there's this terror.
Really?
Yeah, there's a lot of fear
that's
about
funny.
what's gonna. Oh my goodness, they're seen as being wild. They tend to take more risks.
That's true. Yeah.
They tend to go out from the home more.
It's the prodigal son.
To want to have that freedom, right? To want to be untethered, and we have a tendency towards wanting to manage every moment of a child's life in this society today. And boys resist that. But I would say that is good that they resist being fully managed. We want boys to be a bit wild. I think of Aslan, and I think of our headmaster Alvaro de Vicente when he gives his talk to prospective parents
at the open house.
At the open house, and he gives that image of Aslan.
Right.
And
he's dangerously good.
I thought he was good.
Dangerously
good. But that doesn't mean he's not dangerous. Dangerously good. And to be dangerous, you need to be open to the fact that boys are going to take risks. But going back to some of the research we found, and this is going back decades, researchers have found that while boys do take risks, we don't need to intervene with them as often as we do. Now, there are times in which we need to, because for their own sake, they're going to do something which they don't know is
irreversibly dangerous.
Yes.
Right.
But every time, and this is the problem that we see, which the anxious generation talks about, and others, is that by overly managing and overly making rules like that completely negate the possibility for physical contact that could possibly lead to even the slightest injury, we're actually doing more injury to psychologically to that boy. And I would say, okay, so don't be afraid.
Okay, so don't be afraid
of the boy.
Let them take risks.
And also going back to Brizendine and her research on NGURI and the Gurrian Institute, I talk about those because they're the ones we spent the most time on so far. But there are others, of course, like Sachs. We haven't spoken about Sachs, but he's part of the reason we started this venture to begin with, because we saw, hey, there's a lot being said.
Good stuff out there.
And a lot out there. Leonard Sachs, that is. But just how as we mature, there is a plan for our development into men. There's a biological unfolding, which is beautiful. And every stage has a particular beauty to it. And Anthony Eslin speaks about how this, and I know what he's talking about. When we see boys really alive as boys and enjoying themselves as boys and doing what boys do naturally, there's a kind of satisfaction in that. And we remember what it was like to be that boy, in a way. And as boys go into I think the most difficult time for a lot of us to manage is those early teenage years and going into adolescence. And I mean, I highly recommend reading what the middle school teachers say about this, and what Andrew Reed writes about this, about raising boys in freedom and what that really means. Because boys need guidance to become who and what they're called to be, but nature is working with us.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's encouraging to see these changes being celebrated as good.
Mm-hmm.
Not just, oh no,
right?
Because it's going to be tough. And this is the thing too. We as parents need to take, and educators, teachers, I think we need to take, this is just, I haven't really articulated this except for right now, but when God looked at man and said it was very good, that final day, I think that we need to look at a boy in every stage and say it is very good.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes with
you are a middle school boy.
You are a middle school boy. That is very good.
Right.
But you're not meant to stay a little middle school boy.
You're sanctifying me. That's very good.
It is very good. But you're not. Of course, you're not meant to stay that, right?
Right. Yes.
Which they know, but it takes time.
Yes.
These things, like growth and virtue, of course, takes time. And virtue is not just like, I'm going to do it. But it actually works with your nature, with a desire beneath your desire, right? The immediate thing is usually not the thing you want. Mm-hmm. But deeper than that, you want the virtue more than the thing that's the immediate thing that's going to prevent you from having that virtue. So, yeah, you want the comfort, but you actually want to conquer the mountain. So,
yes.
You know?
Yeah, so it's we always say, you got to let the boys be boys.
Yeah.
But don't let them stay boys.
Yes, and also don't let them stay boys.
Let them become men.
And ordering them towards this becoming a protector, I think. And it begins with guiding them. It begins with guiding them, even in terms of, yes, they have these tendencies towards what we call aggression nurturance, or what Gurian would call aggression nurturance, but that sometimes needs to be guided away from violence, whether it's towards each other or whether it's towards other creatures, right? We need to show them that there's boys tend to have this fascination. It's pretty amazing, I think, towards things that are living and things that die and things that things that are like, they want to kill stuff sometimes, and they want hunting is kind natural. It's natural to us.
Yeah. So and then it's sort of it's not squashing those.
Not squashing, but definitely directing them,
shaping,
giving them opportunities.
Tempering. Yes, yeah,
right. Especially with their fathers and with uncles and with mentors. So those desires aren't, because the tendency of, and this is why I wrote that piece that I said, raising the boys, saving the difference, which was a bit of a critique of Michael Gurian's Reichert's book on how to raise boys, is that there are many who are, again, afraid of the risks that boys take and the damage that boys can do both to themselves and to others. Think about drunk driving and how many boys will get behind the wheel when they have had too much to drink, and they will not trying to, but will take the life of someone else. And that's what he's responding to. He's responding to those kinds of behaviors, self-destructive behaviors, but
understandably,
also,
and in a good, right.
And so, but his solution is, we need to raise these boys to become more like girls, which is again a kind of fear of the masculine, or a fear of what boys are. And so he throws out. He just says it's pseudoscience. All the evidence that we have that boys and girls are not just culturally, it's not just a nurture thing, that boys and girls are different. And this is something that I think that become clearer and clearer and clearer, and that not just those who ascribe to a Christian theological anthropology or a Judeo-Christian anthropology see, but people who said, we're just going to clear the field and raise boys and girls the same way, and they see, wait, they're doing these things differently, and we didn't tell them to do these things differently. This is how they develop.
Or if you don't educate boys according to their nature, they're going to more likely check out.
They will more likely check out, and And that's exactly what they're doing.
That is what is happening in many cases.
That is what they're doing, and they're
or act out in even worse ways.
And boys have a particular susceptibility to certain, I would say, I think of video games. Boys are very, and part of the reason a boy's brain is so attuned to kind of be addicted to a video game is that he has such. It has to do with what we see in these small victories that happen on the playground, which in real life that's great, but he gets a dopamine rush whenever he has wins a game. So winning is huge for a boy. Opportunities to win, and I think we talked. This is an area, practically speaking, where we can help. We need to when we have a classroom, when we educate boys, we need to have opportunities for the boys to experience winning. So not just in their sport, but give them opportunities to win in their education. They love it when I play games in Latin every once in a while. I'll play a Latin game, and they just absolutely love it. They get into it, but when they win, the excitement is so real. They jump, for joy. And they're high school students, but yeah,
great.
There's so much more we could say.
So much more. And speaking of so much more. For those who are at home, we have a couple of great opportunities coming up, both this upcoming fall and into the winter and even next spring. So as you've heard many times, we have in November 13th to 15th our inaugural event of Convivium, and this is a conference. I think it's the only conference that I know of that I can find, at least, that's designed specifically for teaching men and for men who are interested in teaching. So we'll have tracks both for current teachers and tracks for guys that are exploring this wonderful profession. And please do note, if you are interested, we have now opened the portal to submit a breakout proposal. So if you want to be part of the conversation formally and share some of your experiences, some of your expertise, things that you love and know so well, please do submit a proposal, and you can find that all on heightsforum.org. And then second, I'm delighted to announce, I think for the first time here, that in January and in May of next year, we're going to be hosting workshops on campus focused on teaching boys. So you get to hear a lot more from some of the research that we've been doing. But even more than that, even more importantly than that, I think really is just being here and getting to see it in action. So we'll have a variety of kind of lecture lab style. Those two events will be January 7th to 9th in 2026, and then May 6th to 8th in 2026. And do stay tuned for more information and a webpage with all the info that you need on that. And then lastly, if you're interested in bringing a little bit of the Heights to your school, please do reach out. The forum, we're offering a variety of different professional development workshop opportunities. This could be half day, full day, 2-day. And in a variety of different topics. Teaching boys and mentoring are the two most popular ones, but always happy to talk about other topics. And yeah, until next time, thank you for listening, and thank you, Dr. Lazilotti, for your work and for your discussion.
Thank you, Nate.